Well, welcome to the 110th class on the Baha'i faith. This is a class that will be the beginning. Well, we're really in the midst of a series of concepts that relate to the unity between science and religion. We're focusing a great deal on some of the critical questions that come up when we are confronted with those questions that seem to, or the answers to which seem to fly in the face of contemporary scientific theories about reality. Of course, the obvious ones are the fact that we believe in a God who is a personal God, who actually created reality and who is responsible for directing the outcome of reality, whether at the local level or at the universal cosmic level. And so we're going to be going through some very tough questions and some hopefully useful answers. And we're going to be looking at some of the theories that science has come up with and how Baha'is who have a background in cosmology or physics or philosophy have responded to those theories. And so while I am neither a physicist nor a cosmologist, nor a philosopher per se, I have, in my writing and thinking, attempted to come to terms with these. So let me share my screen, and we'll begin with quotes that aren't going to be in some neat sequence, but that are kind of bouncing around from one point to another. But the overriding issue is, at least for tonight, and we're just going to begin this conversation tonight, is this idea of the parallel between the physical and spiritual dimensions of reality, something we've talked about before, but we're going to dwell on love and magnetism as the twin organizing forces of the two dimensions of reality. And I'm sure it's readily apparent that love is the organizing force for the spiritual realm and magnetism the organizing force for the physical realm. But we run into problems almost immediately when we bring up these two, and we'll explain why as we go along. But let's start off with a passage that we've looked at very early in these courses. And this has to do with a very important statement by Abdu'l-Baha that that science and religion, not only, as Abdu'l-Baha say, agree. This doesn't, as I said before, it doesn't mean scientists and people of religion agree, but it means ultimately these two fields of study must harmonize or agree because they're describing one coherent reality. And so if there's a conflict, something is wrong with one or the other or both. That is, the findings or the chain of logic is amiss. So let me read this to you because it's extremely important and it's sort of the springboard for getting into the subjects we're going to deal with over the next 5, 6, or more classes. If religious belief and doctrine is at variance with reason, it proceeds from the limited mind of man and not from God. Therefore, it is unworthy of belief and not deserving of attention. So this flies in the face totally of anyone who believes in faith or belief in a religious sense as being blind faith, that we believe it simply because we think it's a great idea or someone who is very charismatic has told us we should believe it. It is unworthy of belief and not deserving of attention. The heart finds no rest in it, and real faith is impossible, real faith. How can man believe that which he knows to be opposed to reason? Is this possible? Can the heart accept that which reason denies? Reason is the first faculty of man, and the religion of God is in harmony with it. Baha'u'llah has removed this form of dissension and discord from among mankind and reconciled science with religion by revealing the pure teachings of the divine reality. This accomplishment is specialized to him in this day. So this age, this day, is the first time that this has happened, because it's really the first time when we had enough knowledge of either field of interest to understand. It's implicit in the past, but explicit in the writings of Baha'u'llah. So progressive revelation was implicit in the teachings of all the past manifestations, very explicit in the writings of, in the Quran, the writings of Muhammad. But how it ties into the progress of humankind on planet Earth is a matter that Baha'u'llah has introduced. So our homework, which we've been repeating over and over with these same questions, I keep repeating them because we are just about on the verge of answering we've almost answered every one of these. And we will do so in one of the next couple of classes as we go ahead to even more subtle and difficult questions. A lot of, or a good deal of what I'm going to discuss, I have discussed earlier in more detail in my book, Close Connection, The Bridge Between Spiritual and Physical Reality. This was revised once I got some more information, and I would revise it again now that I know more than I did back in, I think it was 2007 when this book came out. But it's dealing with that, obviously springboarding from that same quote. What is the link between these two realms or dimensions of reality? Now, again, I love this quote. I've used it probably 20 or 30 times in these classes, but it's important. The spiritual world is likened to the phenomenal world. They are the exact counterpart of each other. And of course, for most of you who've studied the Baha'i faith, you know that the principal reality, the most important reality, is the spiritual world. That's the real world. As opposed to what the scientists would say, which is that the physical world is the real world and the metaphysical concepts are simply sort of ideas that we have about reality. But the Baha'i faith teaches the exact opposite, that the spiritual world is the true reality, and that physical reality is a shadowy replication of that world in physical terms, very much in line with Platonic thought. And of course, as we've mentioned before, Baha'u'llah praises Plato for his insight, or not Plato, but Socrates, who was the teacher of Plato. Plato was, as I've said before, sort of like Socrates' amanuensis. He wrote down the teachings and ideas. Socrates himself wrote down nothing that we are aware of. Now, one of the things we're going to deal with is the fear of infinity. And that is the idea, well, I tell you what, let me go to something my brother said about this quote here from Abdu'l-Baha. My brother, in his work Minimalism, wrote the following paragraph about the concept of infinity, as well as various other ideas we're going to deal with. Because obviously, well, I say obviously, but the fact is that most science, the cosmologists and so forth, have problems with infinity. They can't accept that reality itself, physical reality, is infinite. Some do, but most don't. Notice that Abdu'l-Baha identifies one of the major limitations of classical philosophy in the inability or refusal to deal adequately with the notion of infinity. If reality is indeed infinite, And he's talking about physical reality. As Abdu'l-Baha affirms here, and then we're talking about this paragraph here from a work I'll mention in a second, and elsewhere, then the a priori exclusion of such notions as infinite regresses guarantees that our models will be severely inadequate, our models of reality. Moreover, such exclusions were made not for any logical reasons. In other words, the concept of infinity doesn't defy logic, but simply because of the difficulty of the human mind to conceive of an infinity. In the same way we think of it's hard to conceive of a being such as God that is sufficiently infinite in capacity to be able to be concerned with each and every one of us on this planet, let alone all those who might abide on other planets. And in addition to that, we're taking care of the logical system with which reality organizes itself and maintains itself. This is essentially a form of subjectivism, that what we cannot conceive doesn't exist. It confuses our subjective ideas about reality with reality itself. In other words, it's saying if I can't imagine it, then it can't possibly be reality. Well, because that doesn't work well for a number of reasons. Now, this is the quote my brother is talking about, and this is from a work that has not been authoritatively translated. I've mentioned it before. It's called the Loaflaki. It's the Tablet of the Universe by Abdu'l-Baha. There's a very good translation of it online, but it's not authoritatively translated, so we can't be sure it's entirely accurate, but it gets the ideas, the basic ideas across well. Know then, this is Abdu'l-Baha, with regard to the mathematical sciences, that it was only in this distinguished age, this great century, that their scope was widened, their unresolved difficulties solved, their rules systematized, and their diversity realized. The discoveries made by earlier philosophers and the views they held were not established upon a firm basis or a sound foundation, for they wished to confine the worlds of God within the smallest compass and narrowest limit, and were quite unable to conceive what lay beyond. Now, he's talking about here, whether you're talking about the Ptolemaic inability to conceive of a heliocentric solar system, or later on, beyond our solar system, other solar systems, and indeed galaxies, and then galaxy clusters, and then super galaxy clusters, and so on. Even claiming that there was neither void nor matter, but merely nothingness. And one of the things that Abdu'l-Baha makes clear in the same tablet is utter nothingness in physical reality is impossible. There's no such thing as an absolute void. Every bit of space is composite. Indeed, he has the axiom, and again, we're going to be dealing with lots of axioms, and one of them is that everything in physical reality is composite. Now, the logical inference from that is that if everything is composite, then there can be no God particle in the sense of some final non-composite entity. Well, is that true? Well, that's one of the things we're going to discuss. So another problem, besides the idea of a spiritual reality or a metaphysical reality, let alone a deity responsible for that, that confronts contemporary science. And this is why science and philosophy is sort of a perilous territory for Baha'is, in the sense that you get into that field and you can't possibly posit a theory in which some part of the actions or interactions of physical reality are determined by metaphysical interference or interaction, such as the appearance of manifestations and so forth. This problem is another very important one we will be dealing with. And it is and the reason I say that it's perilous for Baha'is, it's perilous in the sense that nothing you can publish in the field of science or philosophy, so on, will accept the idea that there's a metaphysical explanation. Not many, some will, and we're going to deal with those that do. But you get into that and you start trying to find, well, there must be a physical explanation for everything that occurs. And once you go down that road, it's hard to go back to retrace your steps and say, but wait a minute, there's some sort of collaboration between these two realms. There's some sort of interplay between the spiritual and the physical realms. And of course, that's particularly true from a Baha'i point of view, in the sense that if the main realm is the metaphysical, then there must be some relationship between this lesser realm and that realm. And of course, we've discussed that on the individual level long ago and many times, about that this realm is a preparation for souls to enter the next realm. Though, in fact, since the soul is a spiritual entity, it is therefore indivisible, and therefore it will never cease to exist. And that means that in reality, since our thoughts and our reflections are a power of that metaphysical entity, that our own reality is that we are in that spiritual realm already. And we're merely operating through this physical apparatus, our bodies, and we have the illusion that we are physical, when in effect, we aren't. Here's an additional problem. Can the universe be, and here we go back to infinity again, can there be a beginning and an ending of the universe? Most scientists believe, or I say most, it's changing so rapidly that what was true, and uncontested 10, 20 years ago, now you have 5 different scientists with 5 different theories, and I'm just going to show you a couple here. Hawking, of course, believes that the universe began with the hot Big Bang, from which emanated everything we see in creation. And so we're trying to use these advanced telescopes to discern where the edge of our universe is. Penrose, another scholar of great renown who's still alive in his 90s, he says that there is an eternal sequence of universes. Now, he's saying there's more than one universe. Well, as I've said before, that's sort of a contradiction in terms, in the fact that if universe means all that exists, then there can't be more than one totality of everything. But what he's talking about is systems. So he's saying, in effect, you could have a Big Bang succeeded by another Big Bang, and that he even posits the theory in some cases that maybe these black holes are the remnants of previous universes. Well, again, if they're in these black holes within reality at this point, they're part of the totality of what we call universe, the totality of everything. What is the Baha'i response? Well, this is a very vague summary that I utilize. The universe has no beginning and no end. Those subsystems within the universe are constantly composing, evolving, or decomposing, because everything, Abdu'l-Baha says, is in a state of motion, whether in this world or in the realm of the spirit. It is, as it were, a single, stable, composite body, infinite in scope and subsystems, like a perpetual motion machine with a unified framework and purpose. Now, that's not authoritative, that's my own thought. to sort of give a vague summary of Baha'i thought, but it gets much more particular than that. So my point here is simply that Hawking and Penrose are hardly the only ones giving theories about how the universe began or if it began. I'm simply showing the contrast between those who feel that it must be a beginning and the Baha'i writings, which say very clearly that because the Creator brought creation into being in order to be understood and loved, that he might bestow his love upon us. And again, we go back to the hidden word, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. So the Creator loves us unconditionally from the get-go, but we can't receive that love unless we are receptive. And you know that's true in personal relationships. You can love your child with all your heart and soul, but that doesn't mean you have a love relationship until the child recognizes your devotion and dedication and love and accepts it and returns it. Then you have a relationship. Well, it's the same thing in the Baha'i concept of the love between the Creator and his creation and the purpose of creation. So, as I've said many, many times, the Creator created creation for this purpose. And since it's a good purpose, it's always been there. He didn't suddenly have this good idea. If it's been a good idea, it's always been a good idea. And if the Creator has always existed, then that idea has always existed. And bringing that idea into being by the creation of a physical reality as an educational process for us has also always existed. So in the writings, you will forever find passage after passage saying that the universe has no beginning and it will have no end. The essence of divinity and the ether. Now here we come up with another problem and another thesis or theory. Again, these are just introductions to ideas. We'll get into some of them a little bit in this class, but mostly we will get into them in depth in other classes. What is the ether? Well, the idea that Abdu'l-Baha expresses is that there is a sea of matter so refined, and he calls it the ether, and this wasn't his idea, this had been in existence a long time. But it defies what science presumed to discover towards the end of the 19th century with the Michelson-Morley experiment. But let me read this passage. Thus, man cannot grasp the essence of divinity. We can't understand the essence of God or the essence of our own soul, Baha'u'llah says, but can by his reasoning power, by observation, by his intuitive faculties, and by the revealing power of his faith, believe in God, discover the bounties of his grace. And we do that not by blind faith again, but by reasoning and discovering the evidence of God at work in our lives, in the world that we live in, and the world beyond that world. He becometh certain that though the divine essence is unseen of the eye, and the existence of the deity is intangible, yet conclusive spiritual proofs assert the existence of that unseen reality. The divine essence, and this is talking about the essential reality of God in the same way our souls are the essential reality of us. The divine essence as it is in itself is, however, beyond all description. Now, you remember we've read several times before that the Guardian says that we will only understand God in this world through the manifestations, and that is also true in the continuation of our lives beyond this, that we'll never understand God directly. God is too beyond our understanding for that. For instance, the nature of ether is unknown, but that it existeth is certain by the effects it produces, heat, light, electricity being the waves thereof. By these waves, the existence of ether is proven. Now, the importance of this statement is that during about the same time Abdu'l-Baha is stating this, the existence of ether seems to be disproved. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about what the Michelson-Morley experiment did and what it did not do. Terms and logic. And this is going back, as I say, this isn't going to be exactly precise logical progress from point to point. We're going to kind of bat these ideas around. Nobel laureate mathematical physicist Roger Penrose has said that the present universe did not start with the Big Bang, and that there was another universe before this one, it should be the present one. Traces of the older universe can be discovered in present black holes and certain electromagnetic radiation spots in the sky, Penrose said in his address at a virtual meet of the Sabha Institute of Nuclear Physics here from Oxford on Monday. And this is a quote from an article. And here's what he said. There was actually another universe existing before the present one, and the Big Bang merely marked the end of that universe. Evidence of that previous universe can still be observed these days, he said. In a similar way, this universe will be succeeded by another after millions of years, with the mark of the current universe left in black holes. Penrose, who is currently associated with Oxford University and is a contemporary of Stephen Hawking, said elucidating the theory of the conformal cyclic cosmology, which talks of the infinite cycles surround the universe and the Big Bang. So in other words, remnants of these cycles of the coming and going of the universe comes into being. So in other words, this kind of makes sense from a Baha'i point of view, in the sense that Abdu'l-Baha says the smallest particle in reality is a replica in its system of the largest. So in other words, he likens the structure of the atom to the structure of the solar system. And we know that there is a nice comparison there. Now, so again, we'll get back to these, but suffice to say, this does not comply or conform with the Baha'i idea of the universe having existed not as being totally recreated. So in other words, he's still not getting away from the idea that the universe is recreated and that the old universe exists, but only in some remnant of black holes, which may or may not be a singularity, where all of the matter has come back together again and formed this, well, whether it's a singularity or not, at least this very compressed matter from which even light cannot escape. Now, we're going to go back to the beginning of our discussion for tonight and talk about the organizing forces in these two aspects of reality, or two dimensions. So we begin with the principal reality, which is the spiritual dimension, where we currently dwell, only we're oblivious to it. Unless one of us happens to pass on to that realm during the course of this class tonight. And the passage we're going to look at is this amazing passage you're probably all familiar with from Abdu'l-Baha. It's very poetic in its structure, and so I've divided the lines accordingly. Know thou of a certainty that love is the secret of God's holy dispensation, the manifestation of the all-merciful, the fountain of spiritual outpourings. Love is heaven's kindly light, the Holy Spirit's eternal breath that vivifieth the human soul. Now, each one of these is an axiom, and each one of these is worthy of a class unto itself. Love is the cause of God's revelation unto man. the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation in the realities of things. In other words, everything in creation is an expression in some form of God's revelation to man. Again, that's also very Platonic, or I guess we should really start saying the reverse, that Plato anticipated what Baha'u'llah reveals very explicitly. Love is the one means that ensureth true felicity, both in this world and the next. Love is the light that guideth in darkness, the living link that uniteth God with man, that assureth the progress of every illumined soul. Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directed the movements of the spheres in the celestial realms. So here, Abdu'l-Baha is equating the force of love with the magnetic force, the mutual attraction of masses. Love revealeth with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe. Love is the spirit of life unto the adorned body of mankind, the establisher of true civilization in this mortal world, and the shedder of imperishable glory upon every high-aiming race and nation. And this is from the selections of Abdu'l-Baha, from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, page 27. Excuse me. Now, magnetism is what he compared love to. And so, and it's, excuse me, I'm going to clear my throat. So magnetism, of course, is the idea that all masses, I'm going to have to take some tea, excuse me. You have two versions of scientific explanation of magnetism. The Newtonian version, which was the first to emerge, and the Einstein version of magnetism, or explanation. Now, why did Einstein feel the need to come up with a new explanation? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The Newtonian version or concept or theory of magnetism is that everything is attracted to every other thing, which is, of course, a very nice metaphorical expression of the concept of love. We're attracted to other people on a spiritual basis, but we're attracted to the earth on a physical expression of attraction. And so the larger the mass, the more the attraction. So we don't weigh as much on the moon because the moon is less massive than the earth. So we don't weigh as much. The fabric of the time-space continuum is a concept that Einstein introduced to explain that this really isn't an attraction of masses. It's the illusion of that by the virtue of the fact that a mass makes not a dent, but conforms, or the time-space continuum conforms to that mass in a way that we'll look at in just a second. Now, what's going on here is a debate between, or let's put it this way, in the same way that the existence of God is problematic for science, and so is metaphysical reality a problem for science, and the interplay between the two realms an even greater problem for science. Attraction at a distance is another axiom that is problematic for science. In other words, how can something be attracted to something unless there's something conjoining those, some kind of relationship between those two things? So you have, from the Baha'i point of view, the infinity of composition the idea that there is no limit to the particulates in reality. There's no limit to space and so forth. And so you get into the realms of astrophysics, quantum mechanics, and then you get this problem that helped Einstein disprove Newton, and that is the wave-particle duality, and that has to do with the fact that light, which he posited can bends, doesn't bend, but that because of the bending of the time-space continuum appears to bend, when actually it's going straight, but it's going straight through a wave or a sea of matter, if you will, the time-space continuum, which itself is bent. It'd be, if you will, like swimming in the ocean and you get into a current that is taking you out. Now you, relative to the current, you're swimming fine, you're doing fine, but relative to the shore, you're being pushed out to sea. So you're swimming in a straight line, but if you look at it from the perspective of someone looking at you from above, it would be you were swimming in a curve. So how do we reconcile these two? Well, we're not going to do it tonight, at least not completely, but we are going to approach it. Abdu'l-Baha and the ether. So we've already seen Abdu'l-Baha talk about the ether and compared the fact that, well, we can't see the ether because the ether has no rest mass. It can't be observed, but we can observe what it does. If you want to put it on a very simple childlike analogy, you could say we can't see the wind, but we know that it's windy because we feel it on our skin, or we see the effect it has as it's blowing clouds or leaves and so forth. Well, the ether is the same way. Abdu'l-Baha says we can't see the ether, but we can see the effect it has. Now, what was the Michelson-Morley light experiment, and why was it devised? It was a remarkable accomplishment, and I'm going to read you an introduction to it. Suffice it to say that it was predicated on the belief that there was or is an ether, a field through which light is propagated and so forth. And so they figured that, well, if light is going with the ether, then it should go faster. If light is propagated through this field of minuscule matter, then if it's going with it, it should be going faster than if it's going against it. So how do you do that? Well, they set up an experiment to measure the speed of light going with the ether and against it. Now, how do they do that? Well, they presume the Earth is going around at a certain speed, and of course, it's about 25,000 miles around the equator of the Earth. So if you're at the equator, you're going 25,000 miles per 24 hours, or in other words, about 1,000 miles an hour. So if you're going 1,000 miles an hour and you're shining light with the ether, the Earth is turning into the ether, and so there should be resistance. But if you go against it, in other words, if you're at the equator, you shoot a beam of light towards the west, then it should be going the speed of light plus the speed of the ether. In other words, 1,000 miles an hour more. Well, what they found out was, to put it in simplest terms, that it was the same no matter which direction you pointed it, which led, instead of to the conclusion that maybe ether doesn't affect light, to the conclusion that ether doesn't exist. So let's look at a very brief description. I probably got this from Wikipedia or something similar. For this study, this Michelson-Morley light experiment, we are indebted to a series of pioneers, and this is going to rehearse some of the particular mathematicians, astronomers, and physicists that preceded this experiment. which occurred in the late 1800s. For this study, we are indebted to a series of pioneers, the Dutch mathematician, astronomer, and physicist Christian Huygens, and his treatise on light, 1690, which introduced the idea of ether as a medium through which light could be propagated. And of course, this is the same ether that Abdu'l-Baha says exists. The English physicist and chemist Michael Faraday, who around 1832 studied Newton's law of action at a distance, magnetic attraction, and introduced the concept of a field through which this attraction could operate over time. So in other words, instead of having a void between the two masses and the two masses working at a distance, there must be some matter between them, a field of matter between them. And James, and of course that conforms with what Abdu'l-Baha says in the Tablet of the Universe. And James Clerk Maxwell, who during the years 1860 to 65 transformed Faraday's theories into mathematical formulae. He also established that electromagnetic waves move through space at the same velocity as the speed of light. The experiment was created to determine the speed of the Earth in relation to the luminiferous ether, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, luminiferous ether, the hypothetical substance or medium through which waves of light were thought to propagate. Now, this is before they figured out that light could be studied as a wave or as objects, as photons, as particulates. The presumption was that since the Earth is spinning throughout this substance, the speed of a beam of light would be effective, impeded or assisted, according to whether the beam was traveling with the ether flow or against it, just as the speed of a boat would be affected by the flow of a river in which the boat is traveling, and the direction of the river's current. Thus, at its equator, the Earth would be spinning through the ether about 25,000 miles per hour. I said 1,000 miles per hour. I meant 25,000 miles per hour, excuse me. The experiment itself was ingeniously designed. It consisted of splitting a single beam of light. And this is what amazes me, is not so much what they found or didn't find, is the fact that they set this thing up with instruments that you wouldn't think could have existed at this time in the development of science. How did they split the beam? And how did they construct the interferometers? And that is, they had a sensor or an interferometer which would dictate the exact moment when the beam of light struck it. Well, I don't know how they did that, but suffice to say they did it. So this was done by aiming a beam of light from west to east at in a half transparent mirror, thus producing two beams. One beam then continued east, reflected off a mirror, returned to another centrally located mirror, whereupon it took a 90-degree angle to the left, south, where it was received by an interferometer or sensor. Excuse me. The second beam took a 90-degree angle left. So this is, I'm not going to read this because you can read it yourself. You can find an actual diagram online if you look for an image of this, and it's much better than the words, because it shows, oh, I see, the light went this way, then this way, then this way. So let's go to the concluding sentence. In short, one beam went parallel with the rotation of the Earth, going upstream and back downstream before heading south to the sensor, while the second beam went north across the ether flow, then back south across the ether flow to the sensor. Well, the result was that the light, there was no difference. So what they presumed was, well, there must not be any ether. What they could more likely have, or what they could also have concluded, was that the light goes through the ether, but the ether being more refined than the photons, which we then discovered later, light could also be said to consist of particulates. It doesn't affect it. Now that it's so refined that it doesn't affect it. Most important from a Baha'i perspective, Rutherford postulated the theory that the structure of the atom parallels the structure of the solar system. So we're skipping away from the Michelson-Morley experiment just for now. The negatively charged electrons orbit the positively charged nucleus, just as planets orbit the sun, our sun. This observation parallels an observation by Baha'u'llah when he explains that the similitude between the structure and function of an atom and the solar system is not coincidental. He observed that the different levels of material reality are parallel in structure because all material reality is subject to the same laws and forces. So this is another axiom in the Baha'i description of reality. And this is a quote from the Tablet of the Universe. Nature is subjected to an absolute organization, to determined laws, to a complete order and a finished design from which it will never depart. To such a degree, indeed, that if you look carefully with keen sight, from the smallest invisible atom up to such large bodies of the world of existence as the globe of the sun or the great other great stars and luminous spheres, whether you regard their arrangement, their composition, their form, or their movement, you will find that they're all in the highest degree of organization and are under one law from which they will never depart. And of course, we now know that not only is the solar system that we are in rotating around our star, the sun, but that we are part of a whole composition of solar systems that constitute our galaxy, the Milky Way, which itself is rotating around a center. And so, as I've mentioned in a previous class, we have about 21 more circuits around the center of our galaxy before Earth goes out of existence, and that will be about 4.5 billion years from now. Well, the idea of objects swimming in a sea of matter is something else Abdu'l-Baha talks about in the continuation of this passage from the Law Aflaq. Thus the sons of the praise of the one true God moved resplendent in a vast infinite space, infinite, notice, capable neither of being defined by limits nor contained within the compass of signs and illusions. All praise be to him who was its author and creator, who spread it out and adorned it with countless lamps. Now, a lamp he's referring to are the suns or stars, and never fading luminaries. And he quotes from the Quran, and of course, this means he's authoritatively interpreting this passage in the Quran as alluding to this fact that space is infinite, and so are the infinite number of solar systems. None knoweth the host of thy Lord save him. He made the circuits of these luminous divine orbs to be their lofty and celestial spheres, and he made the bodies of these spiritual spheres to be subtle and soft, flowing and liquid, undulating and vibrating in such a manner that these refulgent orbs swim in the circumference of the spheres and move in their vast space by the aid of their creator and maker, their ordainer and fashioner. Well, I'm tempted to stop now, and I think I will. We'll pick up here next time with the concept of quantum physics, where light was discovered to be not only, well, let me read this and then we'll stop. The concept of quantum physics followed shortly after Rutherford's theory, when in 1913, Danish physicist Niels Bohr incorporated the idea of quanta, or packets of energy, photons. This idea had been developed a few years earlier by the German theoretical physicist Max Planck. This important theory helped explain a number of phenomena related to energy and subatomic particles. It also established the basis for much that was to follow in the study of subatomic particles and the attempt to discover what might be the most finite building block in material reality. And of course, we know since this was done that we keep getting more and more finite. The last thing we broke apart was the quark, as I recall. Okay, we'll stop here, but you can see this is, I realize this is pretty heady stuff, and in a way it's perhaps a bit tedious to hear. But my point is that we're going to take a big look at some of the major conflicts between science and the Baha'i theory of reality, or scientific theories, and what we understand about the Baha'i theories of reality, see how they presumably are in conflict, and how various Baha'i writers and you yourself can see that they don't necessarily conflict. This is really getting at the heart of some very important matter, very important issues in regard to the Baha'i thesis that science and religion not must agree. That implies we impose some collaboration or confluence and so on, but they actually do agree if understood correctly. And of course, it may be many years before we see how they are all in accord. But if you have to take pick a choice right now, as a Baha'i, you're more likely to say, well, I accept what Abdu'l-Baha says rather than what the conflicting opinions of various scientists are presently positing. All right. Sorry if this was totally confusing, but we got to get confused before we can get unconfused. So the next classes, we will deal with a number of aspects of these and other relevant theories about these dual aspects of reality. And particularly, we'll try to figure out, is Newtonian physics still useful, still true, or not? Is Einstein's theory, does it have any practical use? Well, the answer is yeah, it does. And so does Newton's law. But we'll get to that later. All right, friends, thank you very much.